As I mentioned when we opened this study into the book of James, that this is the idea of taking our faith to the streets, taking it to share with the people that are needing to know that there's hope and that there's a way out and that there's a way to experience faith and experience a living, active, and faithful God in their lives. And there's a way that we can take our faith and take it outside the building, outside of Sunday morning and Wednesday night and Sunday night, and take it out there and live it where we live, in our homes and in our offices and in our workplaces, in our schools, wherever we may be, that we take our faith to the street. And I want you to know, as we get into this lesson, especially tonight, I struggled this week because this lesson hits me right smack between the eyes. And it's a difficult lesson. It's something that I have to learn over and over and over again, because as we go through our Christian walk, sometimes we kind of forget, don't we? We take things for granted, or we think, I've got this. Have any of you ever played golf and you thought you had your golf swing down? You're struggling in the early part of your game, and then you hit a drive and it's just beautiful straight down the middle, and you hit a 60-foot putt and it goes in the hole, and you think, I've got this. I know what I'm doing now. And then the next one goes off to the left, and the next one goes off to the right, and the next putt you hit it pretty good, and it goes 3 feet. And you can't. I'm doing everything the same. Why isn't it working? Sometimes we forget. We get off track somehow. This lesson tonight is designed, how do we get back on track when we stumble, when we fall? When tempted, chapter 1, verse 13, open your books or devices to James chapter 1, verse 13. We left off here last week. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. And we talked about how God may test us. God may provide opportunities for our faith to be evidenced by, for example, Abraham, when he commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son. Did he really want Abraham to sacrifice his son? No. Was he trying to prove Abraham's faith to himself, or was he trying to let Abraham see the faith that he had in a faithful God? Abraham said, I believed that God could raise him from the dead. He was tested, and God was faithful. We're tested sometimes. So God doesn't provide the temptation. God doesn't provide enticement. So where does this enticement come from? Why do we stumble? Where is the source of all this wickedness and evil? We go on to read in verses 14 to 15. For each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. And if you were to translate this word dragged away from the original Greek, it would say kicking and screaming. This is a forcible drag. We are drug away against you'd think against our will, but who is it doing the dragging? Is it Satan? Is it Satan dragging us away? It says we're dragged away by our own desires, our own evil desire. We're enticed by our own desire. And after desire has conceived, and it gives birth to sin. And so what the word conceived actually means gives life to. And so our desire gives life to sin. We're going to find later as we read, we're supposed to be dead to sin. Our desire's doing CPR. Our desire is taking the defibrillator and just keep zapping it, trying to bring that sin back to life, because that's what desire, our evil desire does. Now, is all desire evil? really, if you think about it, a lot of desire is actually pretty good, right? I mean, we desire to take care of ourselves. But when we decide to take care of ourselves at the expense of others, is that a desire that's gone out of control? Or we take advantage of others to better ourselves. Just examples, another one of sexual desire that's out of control. Sex desire is a good thing within the confines of marriage. But when it's taken outside of the place that God has designed it to be, then it becomes a harmful thing, a sinful thing. It gives birth to sin, and when sin is full grown, it gives birth to death. So our evil desires create Frankenstein. It creates the zombies. It creates wanting us to come out of the grave living in sin. That's what our desires are. So what do we need to do about this desire? Matthew Poole, early Bible scholar, wrote a series of commentaries. And on this passage in the book of James, this is one thing that he said that I found extremely interesting. He said, James, the author of the book, shows a greater cause of sin, that lust has a greater hand in it than either the devil or his instruments. He said, the bigger part of sin is what I've got inside me, my own desire, than Satan or his angels or his demons. Now, what do we have a tendency to do? We can make a joke of it. You can probably buy t-shirts all over the place that say, the devil made me do it, right? We can buy posters, and we joke about it, that the devil made me do it. But isn't that really what we try to say sometimes? When somebody says, why did you do that? You know, why did you do that to hurt me? And we say, I was just tempted. I was just tempted. The devil just got a hold of me, right? When we do that, when we try to lay everything off at the hand of the devil, what are we doing? We're not taking any responsibility for ourselves. We're saying we have no control. And what Matthew Poole is saying, that the greater cause of sin is the lust that's inside me. He's greater than the devil or his instruments. He goes on to say, who cannot make us sin without our own consent. They sometimes tempt, but do not prevail. Every time we're tempted, do we sin? No. Sometimes we're able to say no. And sometimes their tempting doesn't even really tempt us much at all, does it? But sometimes we say yes. And that's what he's trying to get across. James is trying to get across to us is you have control over your life. You have the ultimate decision as to what you do, the choices that you make, whether you choose to follow what is good and holy and just, or whether you give in to passion and desire and lust. It's our choice. And we don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. David?
I totally agree with everything you're saying. And that's irrespective of whatever life has thrown at us, right? Life is tough. And for some people, it's even tougher. Mm-hmm. But to your point, you have a choice. And if you think about it, if you go back to the second sin recorded, what God tells Cain is, sin is crouching at the door, or that desire is right there. And he gives him a solution. He says, you must rule over it.
Right.
And that's exactly what you're saying. We have to rule over these desires or these lusts.
And that's what we're going to talk about tonight, exactly, is how do we make the choice to get back in the driver's seat of the bus? I mean, that's a question Dr. Phil likes to ask. Who's driving your bus? Who's behind the wheel? Who did you give the controls to? Well, in the Christian's case, many times we give the controls to Satan. We say, take over. It's yours. I'm just going to sit back here and mess with my phone or my tablet. Let me know when we get to where we're going. man's passion, Satan uses our own passions as the bait. He doesn't have to go to the bait shop. We've got it right here. We're stocked up full with passion and desires and lust that we'll gladly provide him to use the temptation. He's using what's already here in me to cause me to fall, to stumble. But I fall because I made the choice. I knew a man, he didn't plan to go and become a gambling addict and lose his house at the table. I know another man that didn't plan to let materialism control him, so that he went out and spent so much money that he ended up having to file bankruptcy because he owed more than he could possibly make. I know somebody that didn't plan on being a drug addict. You know, they didn't, on their day at school, when they ask you, what would you like to be when you grow up? I want to be a drug addict. That wasn't what he picked. That wasn't what he signed up for. But that's where he ended up. He didn't plan that. I know somebody else that told me that they struggle with pornography. That's not what they planned for their life. They didn't want to be addicted to porn, but that's where they are. That's where their life is right now. And they're trying to find a way out. There's another person that didn't plan to say things that hurt another brother and sister in Christ, so much so that that person left the faith. That wasn't their plan, but it was fun. We like talking about others. It makes us feel good when we can show how good we are at the expense of someone else. It makes us feel good, but does it last? We didn't plan to hurt somebody, but that was a result. We didn't plan to have family breakups, family disturbances, but there are families that sisters and brothers and mothers and children haven't spoken to each other for years. They didn't plan that, but that's what happened. There are others that are married that when they put that ring on their finger, when they took those vows, they didn't plan to take it off one day so that they could have an affair. But that's where they ended up. We didn't plan to get in over our heads, but that's what happened. And sometimes we get so far over our heads that what does the Bible say the end result is? What does James say? Death. It wasn't a plan, but it's what happens when desire is fully conceived. No one plans to wreck their life. When you sit down and they ask you to come up with a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, Randy, y'all have got your own business. Did y'all write Wreck Our Lives? Wreck Our Lives at 55, you know. No one plans to make stupid choices. Nobody wants to do that. So where do they come from? How do they happen? How do I do them? How do I make such stupid choices? The problem is that we don't plan not to. We don't have a plan on how am I not going to do these bad decisions, these stupid choices, to give in to these passions and decisions. So the question comes up tonight, how do we stop the train? I want to get off. How do we stop that crazy spiral of death? That where we get sucked into that spiral that goes over, desire gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death, and we have another desire and another sin and another desire and another sin, and we just go down and down and down till we wake up sometime and say, how did I get here? How do we get off? Colossians 3, Paul tells us, Colossians 3, chapter 5 through 10. So put to death the sinful earthly things lurking within you. Have nothing to do with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Don't be greedy, for the greedy person is an idolater, worshiping things of this world. Because of these sins, God's anger is coming. You used to do these things when your life was still part of the world, but now is the time to get rid of anger, rage, malice behavior, slander, and dirty language. Don't lie to each other, for you. And I want to add one in here. He says, don't lie to each other. But couldn't we also put in there, don't lie to yourself? Don't lie to yourself. For you have stripped off your old sinful nature and all its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him. Where I used to live, just right down here in Carmen, about 5 streets away before I moved, this is part of the reason I moved. I had those 300-year-old pecan trees that took so much work. They dominated my free time. And they would put off these little seedling things. We had squirrels that Deidre loves. Deidre loves squirrels. Ask her sometime. And these squirrels would haul off these pecans and plant them. Meaning to come back, but for some reason they didn't come back and get every one of them. And so these things start to grow. And I would try to pull them up. The problem is, it looks like it should be fairly easy, right? But look where the ground is. The ground level is where the red line is. The root is actually, what's under the ground is actually longer than what's above the ground. It's got a stronger grip in the earth than what you can ever see. Isn't that true about desire and lust? They have a deeper grip on me than I'm ever going to let you see or let the world see. So how do we kill sin at desire? How do we stop the process? How do we get off the train? Going back to this sapling, is it easier to kill a desire at this stage or this stage? I've been there, and let me tell you, it ain't pretty. So some people say, I see that I've got this thing in my life that I need to fix, this desire that has taken control of me, and I want to change. I'm just going to stop it cold turkey. How often does that work? How often does it work when we just say, I'll just stop, not going to do it anymore? If you can, God be with you. I can't. Some people say, well, I'm just going to crank up the willpower. One thing I found out, and I think you might agree with me, is not that. Willpower is a limited resource. It's not unlimited. I got one of those new tankless water heaters. I have never-ending hot water. It's great. But my old hot water heater over here, it had 30 gallons. You know what happened if you took a shower too long? It got cold. It ran out. That's what happens to our willpower, doesn't it? It has a limited supply. And if we try to crank it up, we're going to crank it up sometime and find out there ain't nothing there. There's no reserve of willpower to go into when we need it the most. Don't we have a tendency to treat our desire like this? Like the moth drawn to the flame, where we try to get as close to it as we can. I remember my brothers and I, we would be fighting the back seat, and we had, do you remember old vinyl seats, you know, that they used to have in the car? We had a line kind of in the little roll there in the middle, and Dad said, that's a line, don't cross it. You stay on your side, you stay on your side. My brother would sit there and go, and he's crossing it. Did not, got right up to it, you know. We like to get up to as close to sin as we can. You know, another example of this is there was a television show that was quite popular a number of years ago, Cheers. Do you remember Sam? Who was Sam? Sam was the bartender. Sam had something wrong in his life that devastated his life. It took his career away, took his marriage away. Look what it cost him. And what was that problem? Alcoholism. But what did Sam choose for a career? A bartender. He owned a bar. Okay? So he's putting himself in the very environment that cost him his marriage and cost him his career. Now, in the show, Sam seems to be pretty successful at taking care of his problem, but what is he doing? He's enabling everybody else. How concerned does he seem to be about Norm? He's worried about when Norm's going to pay his tab, right? When he's going to pay for all that beer that he's been serving him. He may be able to resist, but he's putting himself in a situation where he's leading other people to the very problem that destroyed a good portion of his life. 1 Thessalonians 5:22 says, stay away from every kind of evil. King James says every form. Don't see how close you can get to it. Stay away from it. If the line is here, draw your own line back here. You want to stay away from it, not be close to it. Because what happens if you get too close? You get burned. And what happens in my life, what happens in your life if we get burned? We usually take somebody with us. We very seldom cause our own lives to spiral out of control without taking somebody else with us. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going inside of me, he said to the boy. It's a terrible fight between two wolves. One is evil. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pride, self-pity, guilty, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. He continued, there's another good wolf. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going inside you and every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and he says, Grandfather, which wolf will win? The grandfather, old Cherokee, simply replied, the one that you feed. The one that you feed is going to win you over. So the question is, which desire in you are you going to feed? Which desire am I going to feed that I'm going to say is the most important thing in my life, that I'm going to protect it above anything else? I'm going to shelter it, hold it, and protect it. Billy was told by his mother to come straight home from the bus stop. I don't know if you can see up in the top left-hand corner where the big arrow is. That's where the bus stop was. Down in the bottom left corner is where his house is. And his mother's waiting him. She says, Billy, I've been worried about you. Where have you been? Just walking home from the bus. Did he do what his mom asked him to do? What did he do? Did he really do anything wrong? I mean, let's look at it. He left the bus stop. He came over. He talked to the lady at the crosswalk lady. He came over, jumped over the fire hydrant, went over, petted the dog. He went over, across the street, said hello to a neighbor, came over, played on some playground equipment, talked to his neighbor who's working on his car. He came over and played ball with some kids, and on and on and on, and played with a cat, did all sorts. Were any of those things bad in and of themselves? No, none of them were. But when you put them together, did he obey his mother? He didn't. I'm showing you that for a reason. This is called seemingly irrelevant decisions. I'm going to try to give you a tool that has helped me, and I need to remind myself, and like I struggle with this too, that helps me in overcoming desire. And I wanted to share it with you tonight. When we sin, when we give in to our desires, what has happened is there's been like Billy did, there's been a series of simply irrelevant decisions along the way. And so one of the ways to kill sin, a desire, and to prevent us from falling into sin and death is to let's look at those simply irrelevant decisions and see, is there some point we can recognize I'm headed into trouble? I'm headed into sin. I'm headed into death. Simply irrelevant decisions, if you define it, is those choices that are early in the path of decisions that place the individual in a high-risk situation. In and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with them, but they put you in a position of heading down a high-risk situation. They're not necessarily wrong or sinful. Often they are made without any direct, conscious intent to do anything wrong. Like, do you think Billy, in our little example there, did he intend to disobey his mother? Do you think he got off the bus saying, she can't tell me what to do? She ain't the boss of me. I'll show her who's in charge. Do you think that was his attitude? No. He saw the puppy dog and said, cool. He saw the kids playing ball and he said, let's play. All of these irrelevant decisions led to disobedience and ultimately led to some punishment. That's how it works in our life. We make all of these irrelevant decisions, what we think are irrelevant, but they really are, because they're leading us down a path. For example, decisions to go to work, walk the dog, shop for groceries, and put gas in the car are usually deemed no-brainers by most people. But challenges can arise in the life of a struggling person with a no-brainer, because confused with a decision that is laced with subtle or not so subtle pitfalls and booby traps that can lead one back to old self-destructive behaviors. Let's look at some examples. Again, Romans 6:2 said, how can we who died to sin live in it? I like the way the Message puts it. It's a paraphrase, not a translation. But it says, if we've left the country where sin is sovereign, how can we still live in the old house there? Or didn't you realize we packed up and left there for good? Dieter and I sold the house over here in Carmen in November. We moved over to our new house in February. What do you think if I went tonight and I just went in the door of that house and I went and made myself a sandwich and sat down and started watching TV in that old house? They'd call the cops, right? There's definitely something wrong with that picture. Paul's asking the same thing. You've died to sin. Why do we want to continue to live the way we used to? It comes down to this. The quality of our decisions affect the quality of our life. Do you think that's a true statement? Let's change it a little bit. In other words, we make our decisions, then our decisions make us. The decisions can be our identity. Let me give you an example. How many of our decisions have turned into I am statements? Have you ever heard somebody go into a meeting and say, hi, my name is John. I am an alcoholic. I'm so-and-so and I'm a sex addict or a gambling addict. I heard one person go into a class at church, and she said, I'm divorced. I'm a divorcee. She had that D stamped on her forehead in her mind. Our decisions become our identity. I'm a failure. We tell ourselves based on the quality of our decisions that that's who we are. But who is the great I am? God is the great I am. And what does he say about the creatures he made? That we are made in the image of God. Our decisions don't have to define us if we can change how we make decisions and how we choose to live our life. I am a child of God. Many of the decisions people face are couched within the context of everyday living and are sometimes underestimated in their relevance to one's health and well-being. For example, the decision to stop at to get a snack at a convenience store when one is hungry is seemingly irrelevant, is it? Is there anything wrong with stopping by and getting a snack at a convenience store? But what if the person's recovering from a gambling addiction, and that counter is full of lottery tickets? Have you ever been into a convenience store where that's not the picture? What if they're recovering, they're trying to give up smoking and the effect it's had on their health, and they go in there, what's behind the counter? So is that decision irrelevant to them? No. Some people, yes. Some people, no. That's what we're talking about in taking control of some of these irrelevant decisions. Also, the decision to go to a dentist seems irrelevant, even downright noble on some accounts, until the person struggling with drug addiction drives through the old neighborhood on his way to the dentist's office. He chooses to drive a route that takes him through the place he got his drugs that got him in trouble in the first place, by the neighborhood where the friends provided him with his drugs. For you and me, that might not be a temptation, but for him, it could be deadly. Likewise, the decision to subscribe to TV packages with the extra movie channels like Cinemax and Showtime and yada, yada, and yada, yada, for the person who is fighting lust and addiction to pornography, is that a relevant decision? Where they have X-rated, unrated, R-rated. I mean, it's bad enough on channel 4, 5, 8, but for a person who has that addiction, is that an irrelevant decision? It's not. Seems like it is, but it can lead to giving in to our desires. So can you think of any seemingly irrelevant decisions that could lead us to fall into one of these sins? How about sexual immorality, adultery? How about a woman goes to lunch with some friends, and as she walks by Chili's, there's a coworker sitting there, and he looks up and he says, "Hiya." And she says, "Hiya." She goes by, going down the hall another day, and he says, "Hiya, didn't I see you at Chili's?" And she says, yeah, that was me. Well, do you go to Chili's often? Tuesdays. Maybe I'll see you there sometime. They run into each other a few more times, and then one Tuesday morning she's getting up and getting dressed, and she decides to look up, dress a little bit nicer than she had been. And she goes to Chili, and she starts looking for him. And I'm not going to take the time to tell you how that progresses, but it all started with a hiya. A seemingly irrelevant decision if we don't watch ourselves, if we don't put up the stop signs, can lead to death. What about just jealousy and covetousness? You know, all of these things I'm talking about, all of these sins that can cause death aren't black ones like we think of adultery and murder and theft and all of these other things. Isn't covetousness and jealousies just as deadly to the child of God? What about greed? What about impurity? What about when I decide to hang around the water cooler where the guys are telling sexually explicit jokes? Or when they're talking about their wives in disparaging terms? Or where they're talking about meeting up and going to the strip club after work? What about idolatry, materialism? Hey, let's go shopping. Is that a bad thing? But to somebody who has trouble controlling the stewardship of their money, could it be deadly? How do simply irrelevant decisions play a part in our Christian life? Judging, gossiping, causing divisions within the church. How many churches have you heard had a split? Did that split just happen overnight? Or did that split happen very slowly and over a period of time because of people making little decisions that didn't seem big at the time, but led to other things? And there are more. What your issue is may not be my issue. Mine may not be somebody else's. But we've all got one. We've all got desires within us. The Bible says we do. James says we do. What are they? Consider, sometimes changing desires leads to hard choices. Let me tell you about how changing your desire leads to hard choices. Deidre's not going to like this. There are plenty of it that probably don't like this, but okay, let's talk about coffee. How many of you liked coffee the first time you drank it? Okay, there's a few weirdos out there. Not many. Didn't most of us make an expression kind of like that? I told Deidre, I said, it's bitter. I don't like it. And this is what she told me. It's an acquired taste. You know what my answer was? Why? Why do you want to acquire a taste for something that you don't like, that kind of gags you? Why do I want to do that? Because there's a payoff. There's some kind of payoff. What is it? There's an emotional payoff, a psychological payoff, or a physical payoff. I get something out of it that I'm pursuing, that I'm willing to set aside that momentary issue because I get something out of it. Sin always seems to have a payoff. For the wages of sin is death. But what does Satan promise you? Oh, it's going to be good. God wants you to be happy. Genesis 3, verses 6. So let's look at the very first sin. It says that she saw the tree was beautiful. The fruit looked delicious. She wanted the wisdom it would give her, so she took some of the fruit and ate it. Isn't that what James talks about? She saw, she wanted, she took. That's the progress of desire. If we don't look, was it wrong for her to look at the tree? No. Was it wrong to her to have a discussion with somebody? No. Couldn't she have resisted Satan like Jesus did? She couldn't answer like Jesus. Well, God says this, and I believe it. And was it that God said it, and I believe it, and that settles it? She could have done that, but she wanted it. She gave in to the desire, and desire led to sin. And sin, Eve's and Adam's sin, led to death. In America, we've got problems. We got rights. Hands off my freedoms, hands off my rights. I have the right to do whatever I want to do. Paul says in Corinthians 10, all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful, but not all things build up. He tells us in chapter 8, verses 9 to 13, but be careful that your freedom does not cause others to stumble with a weaker conscience. I want to change that to be careful that your freedoms don't cause you to stumble, or my freedoms don't cause me to stumble because of my weakness. So if what I eat causes another believer to sin, I will never eat meat again as long as I live, because I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. Apply the same principle to myself. I don't want to stumble. I'm going to give up my right because it makes me stronger. But what if exercising my right caused somebody to stumble and that's me? We need to take a good look in the mirror. We need to look at ourselves. We need to spend time on our knees with God and say, show me. Read the book of Psalms. David prays over and over, show me my iniquity, God. Show me my impurity. Have God show us what we need, where our evil desires are. I came to a bad conclusion one time when I did this process, and I need to do it again. And I'm confessing that to you right now. I've got areas in my life I need to shore up. And I remembered that this week while I'm studying, is I realized at one time when I was going through a time when I'd walked away from God and things were going wrong in my life, I realized nobody took my sword and armor. I laid them down. I surrendered them. Satan didn't take them from me. I handed them over. Got a homework assignment, and I apologize for keeping you a few minutes late, but I hope this will be beneficial to you. Spend time alone with God and think about what desires you struggle or battle with. Write them down. Acknowledge them. Own them for what they are. They're not pretty. Mine are not pretty. Yours are not pretty. Sin is not pretty. But own them, acknowledge that they exist. Then think about a time in which your desire won and you stumbled. Then thinking back in time, look at the seemingly insignificant decisions that went into where you ended up. Just go back and back and back in time and see what choices took you to where you were. Write them down. Then think about what a different choice you could make if that situation should come up again. Spend time in prayer asking God for help in your plan. And then commit to the family. The worst decision you can make when you're giving in to desire, when desire is red hot in your heart, is isolating yourself. Seek help, seek prayers. Let the family pray for you. Whether it's a friend that's a brother or a sister, or somebody in a small group or a class or a minister or an elder, seek somebody out. You don't have to go through it alone. Thank you.